Okay, welcome back everyone. Sorry I wasn't here yesterday, but I hope you guys had good weekends and you enjoyed yesterday's session. So yes, once again, I'm going to open in prayer, so please join me in prayer. Good afternoon, Heavenly Parent and true parents. We're here again for joining the dots. We want to invite you now to join us as we receive this content from Uncle William. Be with us during this time. And yeah, we're just very grateful and want to express our thanks for this opportunity. So I'm going to put this now on behalf of everyone here, and my name is Zoe Wright, which was Blessed Family, Jew.
Thank you all very much, and it's nice to see you again. Thanks for coming for this third week. I'm amazed you got the endurance. So thank you very much. I'm really enjoying teaching this. I hope you're enjoying, joining these dots together as well. Okay, so what we're talking here, basically biblical political philosophy, and obviously one of, when you talk about political philosophy, there's a variety of little themes or concepts that are really important. One is, what is the relationship between the individual and the whole? And okay, so what is the individual? Nowadays you talk a lot about human rights. I'll come to that. So that's one of the important concepts within political philosophy about the role of the individual and the value of the individual. So that story of Abraham and Isaac then, it gives you a philosophical grounding and a theological grounding for the value of the individual and the incredible supreme importance in that sense of the individual's divine, unique value. Other important concepts, obviously, when you're talking about political philosophy, are things like the state. Also, what is legitimate authority? Where does that authority come from? Why should I obey the king? Why should I obey the government? These are all important questions. And also, what else is there? Yeah, anyway, these are some of them. Okay, so we're looking here, what the Hebrews are trying to do, the Israelites are trying to do, or you could say God is trying to do through them, is to create a national foundation to receive the Messiah. Okay, so we're talking here about nation building. So what goes on when we're talking about nation building? So this is one of the other incidents that took place when they're wandering around in the desert. And this occurs just after, right at the very beginning actually, when they built the golden calf. And then we read about this yesterday. Moses came down, 3,000 Israelites and people were put to death. It's also at that time that God revealed his character, revealed I'm a God of love and a God of justice. And then also this is part of that same sort of extended episode. So it says there, this is when Moses goes up the mountain again, or roundabout then, for the second time. Yeah, it is the second time. Then it says there in the Bible, the Lord would speak to Moses face to face, as one speaks to a friend. So that's really interesting. It says there, the Lord would speak to Moses face to face, as one speaks to a friend. So that was the kind of intimate relationship that God had with Moses and that Moses had with God. And when you read the dialogues, you read the conversations that Moses had with God, they're incredibly intense, incredibly honest, incredibly profound in what it reveals about both God and also what it reveals about Moses. The rest of the Israelites, though, they were scared, terrified of this. Yeah, they was awestruck by God. They're awestruck by God's majesty. When God spoke to them and they heard the voice of God, then they were, and they said, Moses, you go up and talk to God and make all the arrangements. They were really awestruck. Anyway, so when Moses is up there the second time to talk to God before he gets the commandments the second time round, then God says to Moses, look, Moses, you led the people out of the land of Egypt. Now get ready to lead them to the land I promised their ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. There's always this personal relationship that God has. Always it's a personal thing. He knows Abraham, is also his friend, and Isaac and Jacob. And then God said to Moses, I will send an angel before you, but I will not go up among you, or I'll consume you on the way, for you're a stiff-necked people. So here God is speaking, Moses is speaking face to face with God. And God says, look, Moses, I'll send an angel along instead of me. Instead of me going with you, I'll just send an angel, because because God is so perfect in that sense, it's kind of too uncomfortable. I'll consume you on the way. Sometimes people think, well, that's not a very nice God in the Old Testament. That's why sometimes people say God was an angel. But actually, that is God, and as I said last time, God may not be how we think he ought to be. It's really important to remember that. We often have concepts of what God is like, and we expect God to fit those concepts. And if we come across something which doesn't fit that idea, then we might say, well, that's just an angel, or, that's just a misrepresentation of what God is like. And Jesus is the same. Jesus is also pretty harsh at times. Anyway, so Moses then wasn't happy with this. And Moses said to him, if your presence does not go with us, in other words, if you're not present with us, the Israelites, do not send us up from here. We don't want to go. They want to create a God-centered society. They want God to dwell and live with them. How will anyone know that you are pleased with me and with your people unless you go with us? What else will distinguish me and your people from all the other people on the face of the earth? So after that conversation, then the Lord said to Moses, okay, I'll do the very thing you've asked, because I'm pleased with you and I know you by name. I know you by name. So that's why, when people get baptized, Christians are baptized, they get a Christian name, because the idea here, God knows us personally, individually by name. So what happens next is that God says, build me a tabernacle. And God said to Moses, let them build for me a sanctuary and I'll dwell among them. Now, it's very important just to look at the language here. God says, let them build for me a sanctuary and I'll dwell among them. God doesn't say, let them build me a sanctuary and I'll live in it. I will live in it. Yeah. This is the tabernacle, the sanctuary which they built for God, but God doesn't suggest at all that he's going to dwell and live in this little smoke-filled sanctuary. And that's always the biblical tradition. This is Solomon, after he built the temple in Jerusalem, a magnificent building. But then he looked at it, he stood back and he looked at it and said, behold, the heavens and the heavens of the heavens cannot encompass you. How much less this house? In other words, Solomon's no under illusions that God will actually live and dwell in a house. You don't go to the house to meet God, because that's not where God lives. Solomon realized, the heavens are too small for God. God lives everywhere. God is omnipresent. And then God said through the prophet Isaiah, the heavens are my throne, the earth is my footstool. What house shall you build for me, where can be my resting place be? Again, God's saying, well, it's very nice of you to build this beautiful house, but let's not pretend that I'm actually going to live in it. And again, this is Solomon, wealth and honor come from you. You are the ruler of all things. Yeah. Who am I and who are my people that we should be able to give as generously as this? Everything comes from you, and we have given you only what comes from your hand. So here's a basic recognition. Actually, God owns the universe. God created the universe. God owns the universe. God owns the world. God owns all the land and the sea, all the fish, all the animals. And also God owns every single human being. God owns everything. God is the creator and the owner of everything. And so this recognition here, how is it that we can give something to you? So how does that work? What's going on here? Important to try and figure it out. So what's going on then is this. God tells Moses, say to the Israelites, to bring me an offering. You are to receive the offering for me from everyone whose heart moves them to give. In other words, the sanctuary then is built on a voluntary basis. People who want to give some cloth or their skills or gold or silver or whatever it is, then anybody whose heart moves them to give can give freely their skills and whatever it is they have to give. And so you might wonder what's going on here. So what they're doing here, up until this point, God liberated them and took them out of Egypt. It was God who, they believe God arranged all the 10 plagues. God parted the sea. God gave them manna. When they were thirsty, God told Moses to strike the rock and water appeared. But over and over again, they'd been complaining. even though God is doing all these things for them, they're in a state of dependency. And in a state of dependency, you always start, it's very easy to start complaining. Oh, why isn't it being run very well? Why this? Why that? Yeah, you're always expecting to be on the receiving end of everything. So what God is doing here, he's giving them the opportunity to give something back. Yeah, by building the sanctuary, by building the tabernacle, it's their opportunity to say thank you to God by giving something back to God. Yeah. And it's not, as it says here, as Jonathan Sacks said, it's not what God does for us that transforms us, but what we do for God. Yeah. And sometimes it's like, it's not receiving love that changes you. It's actually giving love. It's actually loving. Yeah. And so what they're doing here, they're moving from a position of being recipients to becoming creators, or rather co-creators. So it's a bit like a child. Children like Christmas. They like to get birthday presents. They like to get sweets. They like to get things. Well, at some point, a child wants to give something back to the parents. And, they come back from school or the, play group or something with a piece of paper with all these nice colors on it. And they're so proud of their painting and their picture. And they go up to the parents, and the parent, mummy and daddy, are so happy. And they express so much joy to receive this beautiful painting. But of course, if you actually entered into an art competition, it wouldn't get anywhere. Yeah. But from a child's point of view, the child is giving something back to the parent, even though the child didn't actually go and buy the paper or the paints or anything. But it's the opportunity to give something back. Yeah. And it's that which makes a child beam and smile and be filled with joy, is being able to give love, something back to their parents who created and made them. And of course, when that happens, you receive it. You don't think, oh, I bought the paper and I bought this and this. You just receive it with great joy, and you stick it on the fridge with a fridge magnet. And that's what's going on here. And God is giving the people the chance to give something back. So what goes on then is, through building the tabernacle together, the people learn to work together. So when they came out of Egypt, there were 10 tribes, and each of these tribes had their own identity. They weren't a nation. There were 12 tribes who were competing with each other, who, had all kinds of issues with each other, which of course, many of them are probably stemmed all the way back to the issues and the arguments that Jacob's own sons used to have with each other. These things often get passed on. So what Moses is trying to do here is two things. One, what God is trying to do is, first of all, to get them to give something back. So they're moving from a state of dependency to becoming independent and dependent and interdependent. But at the same time, by working together, they're moving from being 12 tribes to becoming one people. It doesn't mean they become one tribe with them all wearing exactly the same uniform and the same clothes and same traditions. Each tribe keeps its own way of doing things, their own customs and traditions and clothing, whatnots. But then they go beyond that to form one people. So how do they do that? They don't all sit down and discuss, how are we going to unite? Well, we all have to wear the same clothes, or we all have to eat the same food, or we all have to pitch our tent in the same way, or whatever. The way they're learning to unite with each other is by making friends with each other. The way they're making friends with each other is working side by side to build the tabernacle together. And it's exactly what Father did when he's sponsored the religious youth service. You had leading young religious leaders who are Jews, Christians, Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs, Jains, Buddhists, from many different religious traditions. But he didn't say, oh, sit down around a table and talk theology together. Didn't say that. He just said, go and build a school for some deprived community, or go and do something together. So when people of different faiths, they're not talking to each other and trying to explain themselves to each other. They're just working together. And when you're working together with somebody side by side, you learn a lot about that person's character. You learn a lot about the way that person is. And then through working together with each other side by side, you're actually making friends with each other. You're learning, actually, we can rely upon each other. This person may believe something completely different to me that I totally disagree with, but this person is reliable. I can trust this person maybe with my life. Yeah, I want this person to be a friend. And so in that sense, it's this friendship and the love that is embodied in that friendship, which transcends differences of belief, doctrine, way of life, foods they eat, etc., etc. Does that make sense? So that's what they're doing here, building a nation building in that sense, making friends with each other across the tribes. So they're moving from a state of being dependent upon God to becoming independent, taking responsibility, contributing something individually, in terms of what they're giving, gold or silver or wood or cloths, but also the skills they have to weave the cloth and everything, to becoming interdependent. So they realize none of us can build this individually. We have to work together. We have to go beyond our tribal identity to work together to build this sanctuary for God. And that's part of leadership, giving people the chance to give something back, becoming co-creators. And when you're a co-creator, then you have dignity. So up until this point, they've received everything from God in a state of complete dependency. And when you're in a state of complete dependency, you have no dignity. Yeah, but when you become a co-creator, you're able to give something back, then you have a much more dignity. And so that's what's going on here. And this is Jonathan Sacks' comment. It's about growing up. Yeah, part of the process here is growing up, moving from a state of dependency to a state of responsibility. So as Jonathan Sacks says, not just, the point is, this is all about political philosophy. Yeah, when a central power, be it God or the state, doesn't make any difference really, or something else, does everything on behalf of the people, they remain in a state of arrested development. They complain instead of taking responsibility. They sit back instead of taking the initiative. And that's just a reality of our society, the world in which we live. If people are in a state of complete dependency, you find they're the ones who are dependent upon the state who do the most complaining about whatever. I'm not getting enough. I'm not receiving enough, not being given enough. Yeah. And they tend to sit back instead of taking initiative. Okay, I've got a problem. How can I solve the problem? Instead of expecting somebody else to come and solve their problems all the time. So that's what God is doing here, is helping them to grow up by pushing them out of their comfort zone. Just like, as I said yesterday, Abraham was pushed out of his comfort zone by being challenged with this test. There's something else I want to say about that story, but I can't remember what it was now. It may come back to me. Anyway, so we talk on the principle about no freedom without responsibility, but at the same time, there's no responsibility without freedom. Sometimes people say, oh, they're not mature enough to have freedom. But if you don't give people freedom, then they never mature. Yeah? So you need to give people the freedom to take responsibility, the freedom to grow up, the freedom to make mistakes, the freedom to learn through making the mistakes. Yeah. But sometimes some politicians say, well, the people aren't mature enough to make these decisions for themselves. We are much wiser. We need to make those decisions for them. That's all this sort of, Plato stuff, the philosopher king and all these intellectuals. We know how to manage society. We know all these people here, they're thick and stupid and uneducated. Therefore, we need to make decisions for them because they are not responsible enough to make those decisions for themselves. You hear this language a lot, and those who are working for the state. But actually, people only learn and grow up by having the opportunity to take responsibility, being confronted by freedom, and living with the consequences of the decisions that they make. So in reality, we infantilize people when we don't let them take responsibility, keep people in a state of arrested development. And there's a lot of that as the state expands, welfare expands more and more, people are pushed into that situation. And sometimes people say, well, that's not very loving, is it? Well, God did not intervene to prevent the fall. Why not? Because he didn't want to infantilize Adam and Eve. He didn't want Adam and Eve to be stuck in a state of arrested development where he came, swooped down to rescue them. He wanted them to learn through their mistakes. Obviously, it would be better if they hadn't made that particular mistake. Then even though they made that particular mistake, if they had taken responsibility for it and apologized, repented, and changed, then everything could have been solved quite quickly. But unfortunately, they didn't do that. But anyway, so God didn't intervene to prevent the fall. He, let Adam and Eve, go that way. Because if he had intervened, they never would have been able to become the lords of creation. If he'd intervened, they never would have been able to win the respect of the archangels. And the archangels were created by God. The archangels are part of the creation. Adam and Eve need to win the love and respect of the archangels, Lucifer and all the other ones. If God intervened to prevent the fall, then they wouldn't have been able to win the love and respect of the archangel. The archangel will say, well, the only reason why you didn't make this terrible mistake is because God stopped me from doing it. How can I respect you for that? Yeah. So that's why God didn't intervene to prevent the fall. Just like, it's like a child. You may be a child, you may have children. They're trying to solve a little jigsaw puzzle with 9 pieces. And, they're struggling away. And as an adult or an older child, you come along and obviously 9 pieces, well, anybody can spot that, which pieces go with which pieces. But if you intervene and you solve it and you do it for the little toddler, yes, you've done it. But at the same time, you've taken away, you've stolen from them the chance and the opportunity of being able to solve it themselves and have a sense of pride. Yeah, that feeling, oh, I did it, I accomplished this. Yeah. So if God had intervened, he would have prevented Adam and Eve from passing and becoming Lord of creation, having the sense of accomplishment that goes along with being able to do something all by yourself. Yeah, which is what God wanted them to have, that sense of accomplishment. So the solution then is to get people to be co-architects or co-authors and to build something together. So we're looking here then at government then, not by laws and not by commands. I think I might have mentioned this yesterday. The idea that laws are very general, they're abstract, they don't detail what you should be doing. They're just a few things what you shouldn't be doing. Laws are also equal. They apply in the same way to everyone. No one's above it. And laws then are very certain. They enable people to make plans, and the rules and boundaries are very clear and they're reinforced. And so laws then create this framework for freedom, which I talked about already. Freedom, free within the law, the idea of the rule of law. And so this then is really a phenomenal. We don't really understand what happened there. But anyway, this is someone called Hayek again, who I mentioned again yesterday, I think. So this is it's well worth reading this book. If you like political philosophy, this is the book to read. The possibility of people living together in peace and to their mutual advantage without having to agree on common concrete aims and bound only by abstract rules of conduct was perhaps the greatest discovery humanity ever made. Yeah? So this is a phenomenal discovery that was made there in Mount Sinai. Yeah? That they were just going to have simple rules of conduct, moral conduct, simple abstract rules of conduct, and for the rest of it, they would just be cooperating with each other, following their conscience, working together, etc., etc. And each person, as an individual, of course, would have their own plans, what they wanted to do. But then as a family, people would have their own plans and people form groups together. The idea of freedom association, people associate to do different things. But they wouldn't all have to be bound to the same concrete purpose. They weren't united by a concrete purpose at all. They were just friends. Yeah, they could be doing completely different things, but they were still friends with each other, and they were just had these abstract rules. Yeah, so this enabled them to become a nation then, not a tribe. So this is a really important thing. Okay, this is again from this book. While in the tribal society, the condition of internal peace is a devotion of all members to some common visible purposes. Yeah, therefore to the will of somebody who can decide what at any moment these purposes are to be and how they are to be achieved. So up to a tribal level, you can have the tribal leader and the tribal elders, and they give the purpose. All the tribe can unite around a common purpose. They can all go to war together with another tribe. But this idea of unity around a common purpose can only go up to the tribal level. It can never go beyond the tribal level. If you want to do nation building and go to a higher level, you actually can't do it by everybody being organized and orientated around a common purpose. It doesn't work. And so here you've got these 12 tribes, but in order to get to the national level, instead of having a common purpose, they were bound together by observing common rules, these abstract rules. Don't kill, don't murder, don't steal, etc., etc. And for the rest of it, they would just follow their conscience, they would work together, they would cooperate with each other, but they wouldn't have anybody telling them what they should all be doing, like a common kind of thing. And seriously, it doesn't work beyond that level. If you want to see a national disaster, you just need, the report will come out in a year or two, what's been going on in the NHS. Yeah, really. You know, the whole thing got mobilized for a common purpose, but as a result of that, the health of the whole nation has seriously been damaged because you can't can't do it like that. So then you have the will of somebody who just gives out the instruction what everybody's going to do. The open society, though, which is what they're trying to create for the foundation to receive the Messiah, is of free men. Yeah, free people. People are free, bounded by law, moral rules which they can't violate. This open society becomes possible only when the individuals are constrained only to obey the abstract rules that demarcate the domain of the means that each is allowed to use for its purposes. Yeah. So if you want to use something, then okay, if it's not yours, you either have to ask permission or you have to buy it. Yeah. You can't just take it and steal it. Yeah. You have to, there's this demarcation, there are these rules which demarcate what you can do and what you can't do. So long as any particular ends, which in a society of any size must always be the ends of some particular persons or group, are regarded as a justification coercion, there must always arise conflicts between the groups of different interests. So occasionally, the whole country might get mobilized to fight a war. That happened in the Second World War, as some people wanted to continue that afterwards, and that's why you got the welfare state. But in order to do that, there has to be coercion. You have to force people to do what you want them to do. Yeah. If you have a common purpose, that means you have to make sure everybody shares that purpose and conforms their lives to that purpose. You can do that up to a tribal level. When you start trying to do that on a national level, you end up having to force people to do it. And when people don't want to do what you want them to do because they got their own purpose and their own objects, then you end up with conflict between different groups who have different interests. Yeah. Indeed, so long as particular purposes are the foundation of political organization, those whose purposes are different are inevitably enemies. And that's what happens when you have the establishment of fascism or communism or Platonism. Then what you have is somebody, the philosopher king, the rulers, the Communist Party, the Fascist Party, Adolf Hitler, Mussolini, whoever it happens to be, says the whole country is going to be orientated to doing this. And if people don't like that, then what do? Either you persuade them to, or you force them to, and if they're still not willing to conform to your expectations and do what you're telling them to do, then you have to arrest them and put them into prison. Because they just want to do what they want to do, but they're not breaking any laws. There's no moral laws that they're breaking, not killing anybody or stealing or anything like this. They're just refusing to obey the state. They're just refusing to obey the arbitrary orders and commands from some bureaucrat or government official. And it's true that in such societies, politics necessarily is dominated by the friend-enemy relation. And so that's what happens in these kind of societies, fascist, communist societies. They're always looking for internal enemies. They're always looking for enemies of the state. They're always searching these people out through the secret police, looking to see who are the enemies, who are the people who are trying to sabotage things, and try and shut them down. So rules of just conduct. So these are rules of just conduct. This is just the 10 Commandments and that sort of thing. It's just moral law. Rules of just conduct can become the same for all only when particular ends are not regarded as justification for coercion, apart from special passing circumstances, such as a war or natural catastrophe or something like that, where you have to really mobilize people for a particular purpose for a particular limited amount of time. Okay, so that's what we're talking about here. 10 Commandments, the rules of just conduct to create an open society, free men. And as Hayek said, this is probably the greatest discovery humanity ever made, 3,500 years ago. The previous way in which societies organized was slavery. That was Egypt and the pyramids, or Nimrod. This is the first attempt, to build a different kind of society, a different kind of tradition, recognizing and respecting the value of every single individual and the right of every individual to work together, to cooperate together, but to have their own purposes, within those rules of just conduct. So, these are really important. So where do laws come from? Okay, we talked about divine revelation. People debate whether it's really divine revelation or did Moses do it, or anyway, never mind about that. You also find a similar sort of thing in the Quran. Again, the Quran is attributed to revelation that Muhammad received from God, and that's a source of authority for Islamic law as well. But what about in non-religious sources for law? So this is a source of authority for law in the Anglo-Saxon tradition, the English tradition. So let's just unpack it here. So there's the way of life of people. People live together in a village, and in this village, they develop their own way of life, their own customs, their own traditions about who does what, and so-and-so does this. And basically, then from those experiences, you get a sort of common wisdom and experience of society. So people realize this is a good way to behave, but that's not a good way to behave. If we do this, it's going to lead to so much conflict. So let's not do that. So they work out a way of life, which means the villagers and the people are able to live peacefully with each other. And so this common wisdom and experience then becomes established customs. So, an established custom, for example, is standing in a queue at the bus stop. There's no law which says you have to stand in a queue at the bus stop. And if you don't stand in the queue at the bus stop, you're going to get arrested and taken to court and put in prison. But everybody does it. Why do people do it? Because people realize it's only fair that, the person who comes to the bus stop first, it's only fair they should be the one that gets on the bus stop first. And if you arrive last, then it's only fair you should be the last one to get on. And it's just a matter of fairness. And when everybody recognizes that's fair, today today I am the last one at the bus. So I'm going to go to the end of the bus, the end of the queue. But maybe tomorrow I'll be the front of the queue. Okay, but if I respect the right of the person at the front of the queue to be the first to get on the bus, that means tomorrow people respect my right, if I'm at the front of the queue, to get on the bus first. And so this is just a common wisdom and experience. Otherwise, you end up with people fighting to get on the bus. Yeah. And there's just a big scramble to get on the bus. People get hurt, people get damaged, there's arguments, there's fight, you break down a social peace, and basically at the end of the day, it's might is right, and the one who's got the biggest muscles and is the strongest is the one that's able to push their way through all the time. But most people don't want to have a society based upon might is right. They want to have a society based upon what's fair and what is just. And so you get these kind of customs about queuing. And there's so many other customs about how to regulate the availability of time, of goods that are scarce and everything else in a way that is perceived to be fair and just within that society. Anyway, so these established customs, at some point, they become laws and they become enforced at a court. So you may have so for example, it develops, I'll talk about this in a few days, I think, the idea, well, okay, this person has a tree outside, has planted an apple tree outside his house. Okay, so they should be his apples. He planted the tree and he's the one who's looked after the apple tree. So I don't have the right to go and take his apples. That's theft. And at the same time, my neighbor's planted an apple tree. I'm not going to steal his apples. And at the same time, I've grown loads of carrots, and I'm assuming and hoping he's not going to steal my carrots. So come up with this basic idea. Okay, anything you planted in your garden, that's yours. Anything I planted in my garden, that's mine. Now, if you want an apple, you can ask, or you can swap it for a carrot, or you can buy it from me. Yeah, and then that then becomes an established custom, and then that becomes a law against stealing. Yeah. And then there may come to somebody might break that law or break that custom, and you go to somebody to arbitrate, a judge, and that person says, yes, on the evidence, you broke the law. So establish the precedent. That's how law develops, these kind of precedents. So William Blackstone, the great common law jurist, he described the source of authority for law as immemorial usage. It's not that anybody made the laws, it's rooted ultimately in the way of life, the customs and the traditions of the people, and the laws are there to protect the way of life, to protect the customs, protect the traditions of the people, and protect and guarantee their legitimate expectations. So I have a legitimate expectation that nobody's going to go and steal my apples, and my neighbor's a legitimate expectation no one's going to steal his carrots. Yeah. And when somebody else comes along and I can see someone's going to go and steal my neighbor's apples, I'm thinking, well, I better uphold the law and tell him he's not allowed to do that. They're not my apples, but it's in my interest to uphold the law and that custom. Because if I can support my neighbor's apples getting protected, then it also means I'm protecting my own property, my own carrots as well, from being dug up and stolen. So that's the second authority for law. Okay, so law here, the law is discovered, it's not made. The rules exist because they're followed, not because they've been designed and imposed. And that's really important. So you can say, okay, that's a law. So it's a bit like the law of gravity. You can say there's a law of gravity because every time an apple drops, it hits the ground. So what that law is describing describing reality. So when you say everybody observing, having a certain way of life, certain customs, certain traditions, you can describe that, and that essentially is the law. That's what has been discovered, the patterns that people follow, which create legitimate expectations from each other about how, things. And so I said they're followed. They haven't been designed and imposed. So in that sense, the law belongs to the people, and it's there to protect the people and to protect protect the people's way of life. That's why law then, that's the way the feeling should be towards law. It shouldn't be, oh, this has been imposed upon us. That's a different thing altogether. That's not law. The name has the same name, but that's not actually law. Okay, so you have this thing which I mentioned before, what we call legislation or statute making or regulation, things that are imposed upon people, without the revolutionary idea that valid law might be created by an act of will and not simply discovered by an act of understanding, which is a traditional understanding of law, the modern theory of the state could scarcely have emerged. Yeah? And so this came all the way back to later Roman law, the time of the Justinian Code, where Justinian said, he makes the law. He claimed the authority to make the law. My God. So the law-making state became the source of legitimacy for all other forms of social organization. As a locus of sovereignty, it was unique. So the state then became, as it is in most countries today, the source of authority for law, and it's the state that makes what it calls laws. So rules prescribe conduct. Okay, so then another thing I want to talk about briefly is human rights. So rules prescribe conduct. In other words, rules say you can't do this and you can do that. And to that extent, impose duties or obligations. So the law is, you shall not murder. Therefore, I have an obligation not to murder people. I have a duty of care or whatever. If a duty is owed to a particular person, there's nothing peculiar in saying that he possesses rights under the rule. So a rule then can create obligations that you have towards somebody else. So those obligations or duties towards another person, that person can say, these are my rights. Yeah. So if the state makes the rules, the state creates the rights. So if the state creates rights, then the state can create whatever rights it wants to create. And at the same time, it has the authority to take those rights away, because they're not yours as your birthright as a child or son or daughter of God. They're your rights because the state has given you those rights. That makes sense? That's what's going on now, this whole discussion about rights. And the state, by passing new laws, creates new rights. The state creating rights. It's a completely modern idea. For us, that's just the way the world works today. But for most of human history, it's not the way it's been. It's a revolutionary idea. So here you've got different concepts of being. One is you're a citizen, which means you're a citizen of the state, which when you go more deeply into it, you'll find actually you're the property of the state. The state has the right to decide what to do with you and to treat you how it wants to treat you. to kidnap you, take you away from it, your parents, or whatever it wants to do. And it gives you your identity in some countries. You have identity cards. The state makes the laws, and the state then creates rights. So the sort of more traditional biblical view is actually, I'm a child of God. Because I'm a child of God, that means I'm a member of God's family. I belong to God. Therefore, you don't have the right to treat me like this, because I'm not yours. And so identity then comes from a relationship with the divine. And we have, with Moses and Islam, you have divinely revealed laws. And this creates this realm, a framework of freedom. So people are free people. Here, at the end of the day, there's no freedom. Because at the end of the day, the state can expand itself till it becomes totalitarian. And that's what happened in Nazi Germany. It's what happened in communist countries. The state sees itself as having, and what's going on in Hong Kong now, the state sees itself as having the authority to control every aspect of every single human being's life. What they read, what they think, what they can watch, what they can write, where they can travel. The state, who owns all these people, sees itself as having that right to use people how it wants to use them. Yeah. So that's very different to what was being established here through Abraham and Isaac. The basic principle that every single human being is a son or daughter of God and cannot be treated as the means to an end. Because everyone has free will and should be treated as such. Okay, so a few other little laws I want to look at here, which are also very much connected to political philosophy, you might say, social philosophy. Most things I'm just leaving out, otherwise we'll be here till next Christmas. Anyway, so this is an important one because everybody knows the last part of here, okay? Sometimes people say, Jesus taught, love your neighbor as yourself. And all Jesus was doing, not all, but anyway, what he was doing is repeating one little half a sentence from the Mosaic law revealed by God to Moses. So it's better to, always good to understand things in context, okay? So we need to understand this phrase, love your neighbor as yourself, in context. First of all, I think it's great. I like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Usually people forget this part, love yourself. That means actually you have to take care of yourself. God says, love yourself, take care of yourself. Be careful about your diet, about your health, about your well-being. Take care of your own development, etc., etc. And also love your neighbor as well. Yeah. So it's not that you should love your neighbor more than yourself. It's not you should love your neighbor less than yourself. You should love your neighbor as you love yourself. Yeah. Because you're both sons and daughters of God. Yeah. So you shouldn't go around sacrificing yourself and neglecting yourself because you're, for somebody else. You should actually look after yourself, take care of yourself. And, if you are healthy and wealthy and wise and in good state, you can actually take better care of other people anyway. Well, that's that. Okay, so let's have a look at the beginning. Do not hate your brother in your heart. Reprove or reason with your neighbor frankly, so you'll not bear sin because of him. So let's just stop there. Do not hate your brother in your heart. So why might you hate somebody? Well, usually we hate somebody because they hurt us. Anybody here ever been hurt? Put your hands up. Yeah, sure, we've all been hurt at some point. Okay. All right, that's just a reality. Life is suffering, said the Buddha. The reality of life is we're all going to be victims at some point in our life. We're going to be hurt. We're going to be treated. We're going to be the victims of injustice. We're going to be the victims of nasty comments or slights, or someone's going to beat us up or something, or mistreat us or treat us unfairly in some way. That's just life is like that. Life is suffering. Okay. The Vale of Tales. Okay, so the Mosaic law says here, do not hate your brother in your heart. So if you get hurt, the natural feeling is you hate somebody. I hate that person, they hurt me. I hate that person because they mistreated me. I hate that person because of what they said about me or what they did. Yeah, it's very easy to do that, to respond like that. So, okay, so what are you supposed to do then? If you're not going to hate people and want to get revenge on them, what should you do? It says here, reprove or reason with your neighbor frankly, honestly, so you will not bear sin because of him. Okay, let's just look at this second part first. You'll not bear sin because of him. Now, if you start hating someone and you become bitter, angry, and resentful, that means you start bearing sin yourself. Yeah, you start getting damaged. You start losing your relationship with God. You start turning into a nasty, bitter, resentful person. So you become a sinner. Yeah. So what should you do instead? You should reprove or reason with your neighbor frankly. So if somebody says something which is hurtful, say, "Ow, that hurt." Most of the time, people don't even realize they're hurting each other. This is really important. Often, someone says something and they hurt you, but they don't actually realize they've hurt you. So all you do, you wander around hating them, but the only person getting damaged through your hate is you. Yeah. The person you hate doesn't even know you're hating them. They just carry on life as normal. Yeah. The only person who's getting punished is you. So what the Bible says here, reason with your neighbor frankly. Go and tell a person, actually, what you said hurt. It cut me up. And most human beings are decent. Most human beings have a conscience. Most human beings have a heart. And they'll say, "I'm so sorry. I didn't realize. I had no idea. That what I said was, hurt you. I didn't." Yeah, that's what most decent human beings will say. They say, "I had no idea." "Oh, can I make it up to you?" Yeah, or whatever it is. Yeah, that's how most human beings will do it. But even if they don't, at least you've got it off your chest. Yeah. And that's important because once you've expressed it and you got it off your chest, you don't go around having any secret grudges and hates towards people. Yeah? So you're not becoming a bad person yourself. So it says, do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against anyone among your people. Yeah. So don't bear revenge. Take revenge or bear a grudge against anyone among your people, but love your neighbor as you love yourself. So if you genuinely love your neighbor, that means if they do something which is wrong and hurt you, then if you love them, then you'll go and tell them, "Actually, I felt bad about what you said. Actually, that was mine. You took it and you broke it." Yeah. So that if you love your neighbor, then that's what you'll do. "I'm the Lord your God." So this works in two ways. This is from Jonathan Sacks as usual. So he puts it all much more concisely and better than me. "Someone you believe has done you harm. In such a case, do not remain in a state of silent resentment. Do not give way to hate. Do not bear a grudge, and do not take revenge. Instead, correct him, reason with him, tell him what you believe he has done and how you feel it has harmed you. He may apologize and seek to make amends. Even if he does not, at least you've made your feelings known to him. That in itself is cathartic. It will help you to avoid nursing a grievance. And that's what it means to becoming sin because of him. Yeah. Okay, it also works in another way as well. It also refers to someone you see acting wrongly, committing a sin or a crime. So supposing you see somebody misbehaving, then of course when you see somebody doing something wrong, whatever it is to somebody else, you recognize, oh, that person did something wrong, and automatically you criticize that person, you judge that person for doing what they did. Yeah. Refers to someone you see acting wrongly, committing a sin or a crime. You may not be the victim, you may just be an observer. The command tells us not to be content with passing a negative judgment on his or her behavior, i.e. with hating him in your heart. You must get involved. You should approach him, pointing out in as gentle and constructive a way as you can that what he is doing is against the law, civil or moral. If you stay silent and do nothing, you'll become complicit in his guilt. You'll bear sin because of him. Because you saw him do wrong, you did nothing to protest. So that's what's called the sin of omission. Yeah, you see somebody walking along a cliff, path, and you can see they're going to walk over the cliff, and you say nothing. You're guilty. Yeah, it's a duty of care. Yeah, you can see somebody who needs to be helped. You walk by on the other side. You don't do anything. That's a sin. Yeah. It also means if you see somebody acting in an unjust and wrong way, it's important to get involved. Yeah, not to go along with this sort of just be an observer, watching people getting beaten up. You should somehow get involved, but of course you have to do it very carefully. Be as gentle and constructive. To be careful you don't get killed yourself, preferably. But it's really important then, if you see somebody misbehaving, then it's really important to say something I thought what you're doing is wrong. And again, sometimes people aren't even aware of it. Sometimes people say something and you can see the other person got really hurt, but the person who said those words doesn't realize that he hurt. Yeah. So it's really important then to say that. So it gives you person the opportunity to apologize and say sorry. And that's what it is to love someone. You care about them. So that's why Jonathan Sachs said a disciple may criticize his teacher. So whenever I'm teaching workshops, I always tell people, if you think I got something wrong, please tell me. I want to be corrected. A child may challenge a parent if a child sees a parent doing something wrong. A prophet may challenge a king. And so, of course, you got there the famous story of Nathan, when King David went and took Bathsheba, and he challenged him in a very clever way, so he didn't get thrown into prison himself. All are summoned to wrestle with, and all of us, simply by bearing the name Israel, that's the name that God gave, that the angel gave to Jacob, are summoned to wrestle with God and our fellow human beings in the name of the right and the good. And that's really important. There's maybe something you don't understand in the Bible or wherever it is, and you think, oh, that's just a load of rubbish. But actually, we need to wrestle with these things. We need to try and figure them out, make sense of them before we can, make a proper evaluation. And it's really important, all these things here. Yeah? As Father said, the conscience is more important to us than our parents who gave us birth, more important than any teacher, and more important than the king of any country. So all Father's doing here is reiterating the Mosaic law. Yeah? Follow your conscience, which is what Jonathan Sachs is unpacking there. Oh, okay. 10 to 7. That's a good place to stop, actually. So next, after the break, then I'll go on and explain how Jesus applied this law in his own time. Yeah, it's really important to understand that. Okay, how did Jesus put this in practice, dealing with the enemy, the Roman occupation? How did Jesus find a way to put this into practice in his own time? Okay, shall we start up again, Simi?
I think so, yes.
Yeah, okay. So welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a good coffee, and those of you who went into a chat room, I hope you did have a good chat.
Very good.
I said we're looking at biblical political philosophy here, which is also to do with social philosophy, about the way the world works. How do you deal with the social and political problems? And 2,000 years ago in Israel, they had huge political problems. It's the Roman occupation. And so, that was the world in which Jesus was born. I don't think he chose to be born into a country which was occupied by the Romans, but that's just the reality in which he found himself. And if we look at the Roman occupation, it was incredibly harsh and very exploitative. So the Romans then, they, I think I mentioned about them. Anyway, I can't remember if I did now. Anyway, they were very exploitative. It's based upon the idea of might is right. It's a very militaristic kind of people. They invaded other people and they exploited them, and they transported and took slaves back to Rome, and also goods and everything else. The reason they invaded Egypt with Cleopatra, because Egypt was where all the food was, and they needed to secure food supplies for Rome. So it's a very, very harsh, oppressive, and exploitative empire. And they came to occupy Israel. It's on the route between everywhere and everywhere. If you want to get from Asia or Europe to Africa, that's the road you take. When they went there, they violated the temple and went into the Holy of Holies. They stole money from the temple. They controlled the high priest, Caiaphas. He was a Roman appointee. They taxed people to death. There was land tax, income tax, poll tax, water tax, city tax. There were so many taxes. And basically, as I said, it was an incredibly exploitative empire, exploiting the colonies, the countries that they conquered. And the Jewish people who were living there, they weren't terribly happy with this. They didn't like it. So there were some towns where they resisted this exploitative, unbelievable levels of taxation. And so the Romans came, they seized everybody in the town, and they sold all the inhabitants of 4 towns into slavery. Well, if you don't want to pay your taxes, we'll sell you into slavery, and that's how you'll pay your taxes. That was a Roman approach. incredibly awful. And this is, again, the sentence I came across in a history book. The bulk of the money was collected, was sent to Rome and paid into Emperor Augustus's personal account. So basically, a bit like the Emperor King Leopold of Belgium, Congo was his personal source of finance. So it's very much that kind of approach. Then to control the Jewish people, then the Romans built a temple. No, they built a fortress just next to this temple. And this is the courtyard where people would meet. This over here to the left is where the religious ceremonies would take place. And then the temple was overlooking and dominating. The fortress was overlooking and dominating the temple, because they knew if they could control the temple, they could control the country. Because the temple was the center of the spiritual, economic, political life of the nation. So that's why they did that. Okay, so it wasn't very nice. So how do the Jews respond then? Well, there were quite a few uprisings. The Jews are more rebellious than any other people apart from the ancient Britons. When King Herod died, he was the king alive when Jesus was born. There's one uprising, rebellion. 10 years later, when they took a census, there was Judas of Galilee, and another uprising, which the Romans put down very harshly. 2,000 rebels were crucified on crosses. Someone's making a noise to me. Can you track who's not unmuted? Who's not muted? Thanks. And then another one, not long after Jesus died, Theodas also led a revolt, which was crushed. These are just 3 of them. Or there are actually many, many more as well, uprisings and revolts. One of them was, a couple of them regarded as being messianic uprisings. But anyway, that was the reality. So the Jews then, they hated the Romans. As I said, they revolted more than any other people, and they're rebelling over and over again. And one of the reasons is because they had their own very strong religious, national, political identity. In terms of their self-understanding as a nation, they saw themselves as free people, the people of God, free people just needing to follow and observe the Mosaic law. And they knew they had a very long history, a very, very high culture, and they hated the Romans, the way the Romans were mistreating them, treating them very harshly, very unjustly, all these unfair taxes, the way they violated the temple, the way they were being treated so disrespectfully. So the Jews hated the Romans, and they wanted independence. But the Romans, in their turn, they looked down on the Jews. They looked down on the Jews because the Jews were different. They weren't like all the other people living around the Mediterranean Sea. They had their own religion. They refused to worship the emperor. They'd rather die than worship the emperor. They had their own religious practices about what food they would eat and what food they wouldn't eat. Also, the Romans thought they were really lazy because they wouldn't work 7 days a week. 1 day every week, they had a Sabbath when they refused to work, even at the risk of their life. They refused to work. So the Romans then, they looked down on the Jews and treated the Jews with contempt. So it's an incredibly intense political situation here. And it's obvious that it's going to be a catastrophe. And the reality is that 40 years after Jesus died, there was a massive uprising and of Jewish people wanting independence. They defeated a couple of Roman armies. The Romans came in with more armies. They laid siege to Jerusalem. They destroyed Jerusalem. They destroyed the temple. All the gold in the temple was transported back to Rome. And as I said before, was used to build many of the great buildings in Rome, the Colosseum and quite a few other buildings. Okay, so there was a possibility and the likelihood of a terrible catastrophe because this intense relationship between the Romans and the Jews. And so this is the world into which Jesus was born. It wasn't that he chose to be born into such a terrible situation, but that was the world into which he was born. And it reminded me very much when I read Father's autobiography of the world into which Father was born. Korea at that time was suffering from the Japanese occupation, which is also incredibly harsh and also incredibly unpleasant. And so in this situation, then Father also was trying to understand how to deal with this incredibly intense hatred the Koreans have for the Japanese, and the way the Japanese also looked down on the Koreans and treated them with contempt. And he also is trying to find a way to resolve this situation. And he spent much of his life trying to deal with that reality, which is still continuing. And so that was a reality which Jesus found himself. So just as Father himself got very much involved in Korean underground movement and Korean politics in the early days, while Japan was still occupying Korea, Jesus also got very much involved in how to deal with the political reality of the world in which he found himself. Yeah, how is he going to bring peace and reconciliation in this kind of world? And so he was a Jew, so he's thinking, okay, how can I apply the Mosaic law in this situation? So he came up with a plan, and this is his manifesto. Yeah, this is his political manifesto. He didn't actually run a political party, but you read the Sermon on the Mount. We always think, oh, Jesus was a nice teacher. He's a spiritual teacher coming along, teaching you all these beautiful principles, all these beautiful words, and etc. Jesus wasn't like that at all. Jesus is a very practical person, and his whole teaching is orientated around how to deal with the political reality in which he found himself. So let's have a look at it. Let's unpack a little bit, just a few verses of his political manifesto. So Jesus said, "You've heard it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth." Okay. So that was what you find in Leviticus. And sometimes people say, oh, that's not very nice. Actually, it's incredibly nice. An eye for an eye just means somebody pokes your eye out, you can poke their eye out. Okay, but of course, if that's what, or they punch you and knock out one tooth, you can punch them back and knock out one of their teeth. Okay. But that's not the way people really behave. It's just establishing the principle here of just or appropriate punishment. Punishment that's appropriate to the crime or proportionate to the crime. Yeah, so, okay, if you know, this is just the way it was. Yeah, it's like quits. It's like, you know, tit for tat in the playground in school. You punch me, I'll punch you with the same strength, and then we're equal. Okay, it's that kind of idea. It's the idea it's the basis of modern compensation in the world today. Yeah. You get your finger chopped off, you know, and chop off the factory manager's finger when you're in an engineering firm. You go and get compensation. You lose a hand, you get more. It's that kind of idea. The compensation proportionate to the damage which had been done. You know, the punishment should fit the crime. All these kind of ideas. That's all it is. An eye for an eye, tooth for tooth. Okay, the problem though is if you're dealing with the Romans, and the Romans are very nasty. So supposing you're walking along the pavement and a Roman soldier comes along and he bumps into you and he pushes you off the pavement into the gutter. What do you do? An eye for an eye is you say, "Oh, you, I'm going to go and thump you for that." Okay, and you go along and you thump the Roman soldier who going and pushed you off the pavement into the gutter. What's the Roman soldier going to do? He's going to beat you up seriously. Yeah. What happens when you're walking through Peckham and you don't show respect to the organized crime leader who's running the local gang? You don't show respect and you get knifed. That's the way it works with these kind of bullies. Okay, so that's the reality. You know, if the Jews behaved on that basis, eye for an eye, then basically they're going to be dead, because the Roman soldiers don't work according to that kind of idea of eye for an eye. So Jesus said, okay, we have to come up with a plan. You know, so Jesus said, "Do not resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also." So you might think, well, what's all that about? Don't resist the evildoer. Shouldn't we stand up against injustice and unrighteousness and evil? Okay, let's figure out what's Jesus talking about here. This is all about first century Israel, Palestine. If anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. So since I happen to be able to see Simi at the top of my screen, can you turn your right cheek towards me, Simi? Okay. Now, if I'm going to strike Simi on her right cheek, I'm going to strike her with the back of my hand, yeah? And when someone strikes you like with the back of your hand, that's how you hit someone when you treat him with contempt. You're a lower form of life, yeah? You got this, it's just completely, when someone hits you like that, they're treating you with contempt. So supposing, you know, you've annoyed this Roman soldier and he just brushes you off, slaps you with the back of his hand like that, and you get hit and you fall onto the ground. How do you feel? Well, you feel it's painful. Yeah, it was heavy, leather glove. Yeah, it hurts. but it not only hurts on the outside, your cheek isn't just red and maybe your jaw is broken. On the inside, you feel humiliated. You feel, he treated me with so much contempt because he sees me as being a lower form of life. And that pain is worse. So what do you do with it? If you've been treated like that and hurt like that, it's very easy to hate. It's very easy to become bitter and resentful and to hate the Romans and to hate that particular Roman and to want to get revenge back on that particular Roman. So you might come across him in the night and stab him in the neck. Yeah. Okay. That's one way of dealing with it. You get hurt, become angry, become resentful, and you hate and you get revenge. That's one way. A second way you can deal with it is you think, oh, you get hurt, obviously, but then you, instead of thinking, oh, I'm going to get my own back and revenge, actually realize he is more powerful than me. I have to serve power. And then you become very, very subservient. Yeah. Looking up to the Romans, saying how wonderful they are and how strong they are. And you become a sycophant. Now, if you react the first way and you hate the Roman thinks, oh, he's just like me. And you just, so the Roman doesn't come to respect that Jewish person any more than before. If, on the other hand, you just become a sycophant, you become servile, serving the Romans, and, you know, in a very unpleasant way, then the Roman will have even more contempt for you. So that doesn't solve the problem. It just makes it even worse. So what Jesus is saying here is turn the other also. So if you turn your other cheek to me, Simi, that's your left cheek. Now, if I'm going to strike you on your left cheek, I have to strike you with the palm of my hand, yes? When I'm striking you with the palm of my hand, I'm treating you as an equal. Yeah, if you ever happen to get slapped by someone who's a friend or you're within the family, they'll slap you on the cheek with the palm of their hand. Yeah, it's painful, it stings, but you don't feel humiliated in the same way as if it's like brushing you off, like you're an inferior form of life. So what Jesus is saying here is don't hate, don't get angry, and don't get resentful, and don't seek revenge. But at the same time, don't become humiliated, don't become servile. Instead, keep your dignity. Stand up to the Roman soldier and offer him the other cheek. Offer him your left cheek and say, if you're going to hit me as an equal. Now, if the Roman soldiers saw that, they thought, whoa, this guy has got guts. I couldn't do that myself. So you're not hating the person. You're just saying, okay, if you're going to hit me, treat me as an equal. So it's all about keeping one's dignity. Yeah. And that's what it is. It's about keeping one's dignity, being normal, and not responding in those two other ways. So, okay, so that's what he's saying here. Carry on a bit. If someone wants to sue you and take your coat, we'll leave that. I haven't got time. Give your cloak as well. If someone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. So again, what's that all about? So somebody's making a noise here, so can you mute them? So again, if someone is, again, the way it was, the regulations and the Roman law, if some Roman soldier came along and he's carrying his heavy rucksack, 50 kilograms or whatever it is, and he's got too far to walk to get to his barracks, then he could demand that any Jew he comes along would have to carry it for 1 mile. So a mile is a lot more than a kilometer, okay? A kilometer is 0.6 of a mile, I think. So, you know, a Jewish man just popped out, you know, to go and get some bread for breakfast, pita roll bread or whatever it is, and suddenly bumps into a soldier, said, "Oi, you, take my luggage for 1 mile towards the barracks." And he has to do that. And you can imagine, you know, how annoying, you know, I'm just out doing my business and suddenly my whole morning is ruined. I've got to carry the soldier's luggage for 1 mile. So you can imagine somebody thinking, okay, I have no choice, I've got to do it. So you pick up his luggage, you put it on your back, and you sullenly walk alongside the Roman soldier, counting out the paces, and I can't remember how many paces it is, until you've added up all the paces, 1 mile, then you put the luggage on the ground and you go home. And all this time you're glowering and resentful and angry, and it's okay, that's understandable. So would most people be. And the Roman soldier thinks, yeah, he's no better than me. If that had been happened to me, I would have done the same. I'd also be angry and resentful. And so that wouldn't have changed the relationship between the Roman soldier and that Jewish man. So Jesus says, go also the second mile. So what's that about? Jesus here is saying, you shall love your neighbor. Jesus is saying, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Now, Jesus says you have to love your enemies. He doesn't say you have to like them. You don't have to like them, but you have to love them. So how does that work? Pray for those who persecute you. So when this Roman soldier comes along and says, I want you to carry my luggage for a mile, then you say, oh yes, I'll be delighted, sir. Where are you going? And you put it on and you happily walk alongside the Roman soldier towards his barracks. And then you start engaging the Roman soldier in conversation. You say, well, how are you? How was your day? Have you just got off the train or whatever? Have you traveled far? Where do you come from? Have you got a family? How's your wife? How are your kids? Do you like being a soldier? How's your commanding officer? And if you love someone, you take an interest in them. If you love somebody, you ask questions. You don't have to like them, just love them, take an interest. And after a while, the Roman soldier then would find himself talking to this Jewish man who's carrying all his luggage. And at the same time, the Roman soldier is thinking, wow, this is a really nice person. Yeah. And the Jewish man starts asking questions about his life. And after a while, the Roman soldier starts unburdening his problems, unburdening his soul to this Jewish man. It's like a counselor. Yeah. And, then after a mile, the Jewish man says, I'll carry it another mile if you like. I'm not doing anything else this morning. I'll happily carry it. I just enjoy talking to you, listening to you. Carries it a second mile. So after a while, the Roman soldier, and even Roman soldiers had a conscience, is going to feel really bad. I'm really treating this is such a nice person, and I'm treating him so badly, making him carry my luggage. And he's even volunteered to carry my luggage for 2 miles. You can imagine the Roman soldier then feeling really bad and guilty about having done that. And if he finds himself in a similar situation another time, he might have second thoughts about doing it. Instead of just giving an order, carry my luggage, you might say, do you mind, would it be possible for you to? So starting to change that. So what Jesus is saying, if you love your enemies, then you're changing the Roman soldier's perception of you. And so the Roman soldier then would think, no way could I do that. No way could I behave the way this person's behaving and treating me. This person is a much better person than I am. This person is a much better person than I am. And so the Roman soldier then will start to treat this person who's carrying his luggage with great respect, thinking nobody else takes any interest in me the way this person takes an interest in me. Nobody else cares about me the way that this person cares about me. This person is really interested in me, he really loves me, he really cares about me. Yeah. And you can imagine this Roman soldier saying, I wish I had him as a friend. I wish I had a friend like that. So you can imagine after 2 miles, a Roman soldier thinks, well, would you, here's my calling card. Can we meet up at Starbucks next week, to talk a bit more? You can imagine this. So what Jesus is saying here, turning enemies into friends. Yeah. Through this love then, transforming the relationship between the Romans and the Jews, transforming the Jews and transforming the Romans. Yeah. And this way, solving the problem of this intense hatred and contempt that is characterizing that relationship. So that's his plan. That was his political plan. That was what he thought. That was what he was teaching his disciples, teaching the Jewish people to do to resolve that incredibly intense situation. So he's taking the Mosaic law. We think, oh, this is Jesus' teaching. But actually what Jesus is doing, he's applying the Mosaic law to the situation in which he finds himself in 2,000 years ago. That makes sense? Oh yeah, and pray for those who persecute you. So you can imagine at the end of this 2 miles, the Jewish man might say to the Roman, would you like me to say a prayer for you and your family? Oh yes, please. And then you can imagine then the Jewish man praying and blessing this Roman soldier and his family, and that he can have a good stay in Israel, not get into too much trouble, etc., etc. That makes sense? That's the way it works. That's the way it should work. This is what I think Lincoln said. His policy was to turn his enemies into his friends. And you might think, well, that's a terribly impractical policy. In no way is that ever going to work. Well, this is Mahatma Gandhi, and he was a student of Jesus, and he encountered Jesus also through a Russian author called Tolstoy, who developed Jesus's teachings into a whole political manifesto and a plan of non-violence, resistance, and et cetera, et cetera. And so Mahatma Gandhi then, he was working for Indian independence. So this was for over about 40-year period. Yeah, he was working to make India independent from the British Empire. And he was determined it should only use non-violence because he realized a very essential truth. If you achieve independence by violence, then the people who end up running the country are men of violence, and they will use violence to control the country. So he said it's better to get independence slowly, but get it peacefully, than the people who end up running the country be men of peace and non-violence. But if we fight and use terrorist means and violence to get independence, then it's men of violence who are going to become the next rulers. And so he came up with this plan. And so he said lots of interesting, lots of very good things. There's some of his teachings. If we could change ourselves, the tendencies in the world would also change. Again, like Jesus is saying, as a man changes his own nature, so does the attitude of the world change towards him. We need not wait to see what others do. I object to violence because when it appears to do good, the good is only temporary. The evil it does is permanent to the person who uses violence and to what comes later. You must not lose faith in humanity. Humanity is like an ocean. If a few drops of the ocean are dirty, the ocean does not become dirty. We may never be strong enough to be entirely non-violent in thought, word, and deed, but we must keep non-violence as our goal and make strong progress towards it. Non-violence is the greatest force at the disposal of mankind. It's mightier than the mightiest weapon of destruction devised by the ingenuity of man. It's easy enough to be friendly to one's friends, but to befriend the one who regards himself as your enemy is a quintessence of true religion. The other is mere business. Non-violence requires a double faith, faith in God and also faith in man, vertical and horizontal. So I've got a little excerpt here from the film Gandhi. It's quite old now, 40 years old. Well worth watching if you hadn't seen it. And you'd be really pleased to know, I got my telephone line upgraded this morning. It's now fiber. So hopefully the quality will be better. So I'm going to try it out.
It is time you left. You don't think we're just going to walk out of India? Yes. In the end, you will walk out. Because 100,000 Englishmen simply cannot control 350 million Indians if those Indians refuse to cooperate. And that is what we intend to achieve. Peaceful, non-violent, non-cooperation. Till you yourself see the wisdom of leaving.
Last night at midnight, they took Gandhiji from us. They expect us to lose heart or to fight back. We will do neither. On the road! No, sir, the gate is closed. mobbed, both Hindu and Muslim alike, with heads held high, without any hope of escape from injury or death. It went on and on into the night. Stop. Women carried the wounded and broken bodies from the road until they dropped from exhaustion. Stop. But still, it went on and on. Stop. Whatever moral ascendancy the West held was lost here today. India is free, for she has taken all that steel and cruelty can give, and she has neither cringed nor retreated. Stop. I am aware that I must have given you much cause for irritation, Your Excellency. I hope it will not stand between us as men.
Mr. Gandhi, I am instructed to request your attendance at an all-government conference in London to discuss the possible independence of India.
And that, yeah, we saw there. That's like something extraordinary. Well worth watching that film if you haven't seen it before. There's a lot of truths revealed in that story. And then, of course, this was also taken up by Martin Luther King Jr. in the 1960s, mid-1960s in America, the Civil Rights Movement. Again, there was the American Civil War in sometime in the mid-1800s to abolish slavery. But then, despite the abolition of slavery in the southern states, there were still many, many laws, and lots of new laws were brought in, called the Jim Crow laws, which seriously and terribly discriminated against black people there. And so again, there's a lot of unrest. And so Martin Luther King, he led a civil rights movement, non-violent resistance to what was going on there. And eventually laws were changed also in the United States during the 1960s. And again, always using non-violence. And most of the speeches that Gandhi and Martin Luther King gave were not public speeches. Most of them were speeches to their own followers, teaching them about non-violence. It's really important, educating them what the ways of non-violence. And several times when Gandhi was leading this movement, several times violence did break out, and he said, no, we have to wait. We're not ready yet. You know, and so he spent most of the time just teaching people the way of non-violence, how to deal with hurt, how to deal with all these things in a non-violent way. That was really important, actually, you know, transformative for the people and for the country. And this is Martin Luther King, some of his things. He said, you can read it here, non-violence is an absolute commitment to the way of love. Love is not an emotional bash. It's not empty sentimentalism. It's not about liking people, having all warm, fuzzy feelings for them. It's the active outpouring of one's whole being into the being of another. Just like what Jesus taught. You're taking care of this person. You don't have to like the Roman soldier, but you have to love him, which means be concerned about his well-being. In spite of temporary victories, violence never brings permanent peace. It is the true meaning and value of compassion and non-violence. When it helps us to see our enemy's point of view, to hear his questions, to know his assessment of ourselves. Well, from his view, we may indeed see the basic weakness of our own condition. And if we are mature, we may learn and grow and profit from the wisdom of the brothers who are called the opposition. Yeah, and I have a dream one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit together at the table of brotherhood. Not this idea that there's an eternal opposition between one side and the other, like you get with the Pythagorean analysis of nature, table of opposites, always in conflict with each other, always one trying to eliminate the other. The biblical dream is completely different to that reading of the world. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they'll not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. So racism is when people judge people according to the color of their skin, as opposed to treating them as a human being by their character. May be true that the law cannot make a man love me, but it can keep him from lynching me. And I think that's pretty important. So that was the whole framework there, the Mosaic Law, creating a safe space where people can't get lynched. Man must evolve for all human conflict a method which rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation. The foundation of such a method is love. So, okay, to what extent was Jesus able to do this in in Palestine, Israel at that time? There's a very good book here. Well, I've never read it, but anyway, it's a very good source book by a Jewish Roman historian called Josephus, who lived not very long, just a couple of decades after Jesus, and he wrote a history of this, the Roman-Jewish War, which is in 70 AD, and he was actually involved in it when the Romans destroyed the temple in Jerusalem. And so he described an incident. It's very interesting. So Pilate, who was the governor, and he was the person who sentenced Jesus to be put to death, Pilate took the army to Jerusalem for the winter. This is the way Pilate was. He comes across in the New Testament as being a nice guy, but he wasn't in the historical record we have of him. Pilate took the army to Jerusalem for the winter in order to abolish the Jewish laws. That was what he was about. He introduced images of Caesar, which were on the standards, and brought them into the city, whereas our law forbids us the very making of images. So he's brought them in at night. This is why previous governors, who had more respect, made their entry into the city without such ornaments. Pilate was the first who brought those images to Jerusalem and set them up there. This was done without the knowledge of the people, as it was done at night. But as soon as the people knew it, they came in multitudes to ask Pilate to remove their images, because they were so offensive. They were so offended by these images, totally against the Jewish law. When he would not grant their requests, because it would tend to the injury of Caesar, they persevered in their requests. He would say, I can't do it because it'd be causing offense to Caesar if I take Caesar's standards out. So these are standards here, the Roman standards that the soldiers would bring in. And Pilate was the first person to have got the soldiers to bring these standards in. On the 6th day, so the Jews have been petitioning him now for 6 days. On the 6th day, he ordered his soldiers to have their weapons, while he came and sat upon his judgment seat, which was in the open place of the city. When the Jews asked him again, he gave a signal to the soldiers to surround them and threatened that their punishment should be immediate death, unless they stopped disturbing him and go home. But they threw themselves upon the ground and made their necks bare, and said they would take their death very willingly, rather than let their laws be transgressed. That's turning the other cheek. Pilate was deeply affected with their firm resolution to keep their laws unviolated, and soon commanded the images to be carried back from Jerusalem to Caesarea. Now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man. So that's the next sentence that comes after this episode. There was a man about this time, Jesus. So when I read this, I thought, well, maybe that's people trying to put into practice what Jesus was teaching about loving your enemy and turning the other cheek. And you can see it was working. I think, okay, maybe that's what they were doing. Maybe Jesus was able to influence people to respond in that way to the Roman occupation, and there was some possibility there of something working out. The reality, as we know, is that things didn't work out. Jesus was arrested and he was executed by the Romans on a political charge of trying to overthrow the empire and being accused of being the king of the Jews. So that was, as I said, this is all biblical political philosophy, how to resolve political and social problems in that way. Anyway, there's loads more, I'm not going to go through any more. So the Israelites then are now on the verge of entering into Canaan. And how are we doing for time? What's the time, Simi? Okay. What, 10 to...
10 to
10 to 8?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, in that case, I'll stop here because this is going on to another section. Okay. All right, so I'll unshare my screen. And anyway, I hope you found it interesting.
Okay, please join me in prayer, everyone. Holy Parent and true parents, thank you. We just received another session of joining up the dots. It's very good, quite relevant, and yeah, it's making me think a lot. So once again, we're very grateful. And we want to offer this time to you now. And I report this above everyone here in my name, so our blessed family, Arju. Okay, you're welcome to stay, like Uncle William said. If not, have a nice day and see you tomorrow. Thank you, everyone.
See you tomorrow. Bye. God bless you. Have a nice day or nice evening or go to bed. Depends where you're living.